All right, guys, let's get started. It is 2:31 on May 6th, 2022. We're here for the Audit and Finance meeting. Do we have anybody online by any chance? Anybody see Councilmember Fears? No? Present are myself, Councilmember Perkins. All right, Councilmember Fears is on his way. We've got Mr. Walker and Mr. Kidney, Mr. Norris from the City Manager's office, and our new management analyst is here, Eric Green. Is that right? Eric Green, good. And Sheila Saxton's here to take the minutes. There's a little mute button. Okay. Approval of minutes. Mr. Perkins, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
I've had a chance to review. I see no correction needed. I'm going to move to approve.
All right. I'll second that, and they'll be approved. We have nothing under carryover business, management analyst items. We've got Mr. Green present. Why don't you, did you write something out for us?
Yes, I just want to introduce myself. I won't take too much time to do this. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Eric Green. I'm a DBA. I have degrees in political science / public administration and advanced degrees in business administration. This is my first opportunity to serve in a public entity, having spent the majority of my professional career in the private sector. I have been given this unique opportunity by an elected body to serve as the management analyst, and I look forward to serving in this capacity to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I'm excited to have you. Thank you. I think we were all part of the hiring committee, and so it's great to have you on board. Thank you for doing it.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Green. We very soon will have some jobs for you with direction of the council. In the meantime, Mr. Perkins and I have spoken at least a little bit about it, and we thought it might be a good idea if you familiarize yourself with some of the assets in the city, some of the property, some of the properties, and also, have you had a chance to meet any of the department heads?
Yes, I've met a few.
Good. If you have any problem with any of them, you let us know, okay?
I'll do that.
I appreciate that. So yeah, familiarize yourself with the city, and then we'd really like you to stay closely involved in this budget process. Today is going to be a bit of a dry run for city manager. Are you giving that presentation today? So it's a practice shot, but pay close attention and get through that if you want. And if you ever have any questions about it from a city perspective, I'm sure Mr. Walker will be happy to share his insight or, whatever you need as far as you learning the budget. Sound good?
Sounds great. I've reviewed it a few times now, and it's an interesting process. I look forward to it.
Good. And if you have any questions during or after the budget presentation today, certainly you're able to have discussions and ask questions, okay?
Yes.
All right, very good. Okay, thank you. That's Mr. Green. Welcome, and we're happy to have you. Mr. Kidney, monthly financial presentation.
Yes, sir. Cindy, our CFO, typically gives this presentation, but I just want to headline it by saying I realize that we have kind of a big agenda with that budget thing, so I think she'll probably just stand for questions on it.
I had none, Mr. Chairman.
No, I actually don't have any questions. Is there anything that stood out in this month's presentation that's particularly out of whack?
No, actually, everything's pretty well on track, so I didn't see anything that was really out of ordinary this time.
Sure.
Okay, very good. I didn't see anything either, just want to double check. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to new business and the big item of the day. Mr. Walker?
I am kind of trying to drag my feet here so your other colleague would make it, but
Would show up. We move fast here. We
Yeah,
move fast
well-
and break things. That's how we're doing things now.
that is evident. Okay, well, I don't have any good jokes, so we'll just jump in and let Councilmember Fears join us as we get going. So, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Perkins, and Councilmember Fears who will be joining us shortly. My name is Zach Walker. I'm the city manager for the City of Independence. And as is customary for this time of year per the city charter, it is my pleasure to present to you the proposed budget for fiscal year 2022-2023. Right on time. Okay, we just got started, council members, so right on time. Nope, they're all good. The proposed budget for fiscal year 2022-23 totals $338,544,661. That is a 0.35% increase over last year. Our budget last year was just right over $337 million. The budget in front of you, as submitted this year, funds 1,176 full-time equivalent employees, all funds, all departments total. So before I get into the specifics of the budget, I'd like to just give you an overview of how we prepared and framed this year's budget. One of the key components of this year's budget was a citizen survey that was made available to our citizens over a period of a few weeks earlier this year. Deputy City Manager Norris presented this to the council in a study session a few weeks ago, but I wanted to just remind the Audit and Finance Committee of some of the important components. So that survey ran from December of 2021 till January 15th of this year. We asked citizens 5 basic questions, received 403 responses, which is a very good response rate for us. Question 1 that we asked the citizen was asking them, what are your budgetary priorities as a citizen, ranked from most to least important? Overwhelmingly, 58% of the citizens told us accurately budgeting for all of our known costs was their number one priority. Running down the list, preparing appropriately for future spending based on conservative revenue estimates at 20%. 12% said addressing the strategic priorities outlined in Independence for All was a priority. And then just around 10% said strategic use of one-time revenues to navigate economic uncertainties was a priority. In question 3, we asked respondents to select the 3 items they believe should receive the most attention over the next 2 years. The most popular priority was maintaining city streets, bridges, curbs, and sidewalks. Right behind that was increasing the number of police officers. Down towards the other end of the spectrum, some of the things that were ranked as lower priorities was adding fire stations throughout the city and funding a transit model to support commuter services to get to employment centers outside of the city. In question 4, we asked citizens to take a forward-facing look and let us know what is most important to them. So the blue and light blue would combine to give you important and extremely important perspectives from the citizens. The orange and red, those rust color items, if you will, are somewhat or not important at all. So paying for basic services like code enforcement, park maintenance, and street repairs was noted as being important or extremely important. Investment in police services. Looking at alternative service delivery models to improve the efficiency of city services was noted as only being important or not important at all. And then really kind of split down the middle was investing in community mental health services. And then finally, question 5, what priorities do you feel like have not been addressed? An open-ended question. Common responses were utilities, upgrading infrastructure, improving billing, improving services provided to customers, police, increasing the number of officers, decreasing crime, new facilities for the police department, and addressing homelessness. Of course, code enforcement continues to be an important priority for the community. Health and animal services, we did receive some comments about additional food inspections, and staff to deal with stray animals. And then finally, streets, dealing with debris cleanup and updating road conditions. Okay, so with that framework in mind, we started to develop the budget that we are submitting to you today. Some of the key pressures, though, that came into play. Last year, the council will recall we utilized about $3 million of the federal ARPA funds to subsidize and close a budgetary gap in the general fund. That was one-time money to solve a one-time problem. That $3 million was not there to use this year, so that opened up a large, significant gap in the budget. We continue to be challenged by the significant decrease in revenue from municipal court. While that is a budget problem, it is also a community safety issue. More and more people are choosing to ignore citations for speeding or other moving violations because they know there's not that mechanism to compel them into this room for municipal court. So we have high numbers of tickets that are still being written, but very low response rate for people coming into municipal court because there's no mechanism to compel them to do so due to the changes in 2015 to Senate Bill 5. We continue to lose about $1.5 million annually out of this revenue source, and this year was no different. That is a significant decline year over year, and one that does not seem like it's bottomed out yet. We have our statutorily required 1% loggers increase to support our employee retirement system. Our contractually obligated negotiated wage increases in public safety. I mention that because public safety is such a large part of the budget, about 70% of the general fund budget. So the costs associated with that are negotiated, but they are budget issues we have to address. And then the ever-increasing cost to the city for cost of doing business things, providing health insurance, workers' compensation, and labor relations. Inflation is a very real cost to the budget this year. Our area right now is experiencing a 9% increase in consumer price index. Some of our recent bids reflect this cost as well. In fact, our recent asphalt costs are up 33% over last year. So just to pay to do the same amount of business we were doing last year, significant cost increase just to keep our head level with where we were. All of those things in totality meant that the general fund started the year just to keep doing what we were doing last year with a $5.3 million shortfall. That is not new services, that is not expansion to additional staff or funding for programs, the things the citizens told us that I showed you on the few slides ago that were priorities. That is just to keep doing what we're doing today and keep the doors open, a $5.3 million shortfall. I mentioned cost of living, but if you're like me, I prefer restaurants with pictures on the menu. So here's a picture to help you understand what we're facing. That cost of living is going up, and away. So to pay costs to help support these cost of living adjustments, we are having to come up with additional funds to support that. I need to mention Independence for All, the adopted strategic plan for the city. These are the council priorities that have been identified: maintaining a customer focus, being financially sustainable, focusing on quality environment, and focusing on the economy and growing the economy. Specifically, the council has issued to us the challenge to reduce crime and disorder, to enhance public health, reduce blight, stabilize and revitalize neighborhoods, and communicate more effectively internally and externally. So again, these are priorities that you have identified that we try to build our budget around. So knowing that we had the citizen priorities, knowing the council priorities through Independence for All, but then trying to address this $5.3 million shortfall, here were the options that my staff and I faced. To address all of these issues, we had to do the following. We had to either make strategic choices and changes to legacy expenditures that are growing at unsustainable rates, such as the health insurance cost, which is not unique to Independence, that's across the United States. our overtime policies, or other personnel costs. We, as a staff and working with you as a council and working with community stakeholders, have addressed a lot of issues over these last 5 years. We've worked collaboratively with our retirees to get a sustainable health insurance plan there. That's something I'm very proud of and is working well for us. We have addressed some of the legacy accrued benefit costs. Those have been negotiated with our partners in labor. We have worked to reduce inefficiencies or duplication of services to try to maximize the benefit that our citizens get, but we still have some of these challenges and legacy costs that have to be addressed. So that was something that we contemplated here. We could focus on attracting and retaining industry to grow the economy. Things like the North Point vote Monday night certainly do that, but it is going to take time to reap the economic rewards of that. So we knew that that's not something that's just going to solve our budgetary issues overnight and let me present a different budget picture to you 5 days later. But we feel confident about what is coming. We could pursue other revenue growth opportunities through ballot initiatives, but frankly, we didn't feel like with the economy that the timing is right for that right now. When we're talking about 9% cost of living increases, to go and ask the voters to support additional tax increases didn't seem prudent or wise in our opinion right now, so we didn't feel we should recommend that to you. We could strategically address service level deployment models to match citizen service levels and expectations, embrace emerging technologies, utilize regional capacity and other industry best practices. And you'll see throughout this budget that this is something that we continue to do and something I'm very proud of. But that's not a silver bullet that fixes everything. We could make strategic use of one-time resources, which is really just a Band-Aid to get us to next year, but doesn't address the structural underlying issues that present an imbalance in our budget. Or we could come in and say, you know what, let's just make across-the-board reductions to an already meager workforce, an already underfunded basic service model, and try to meet citizen demand as best as we possibly can. In good conscience, I didn't feel like that's something we can do. I feel like our service levels are already spread thin and or are ignoring some of the key community priorities. And frankly, we are at a point where those services are already stretched so thin that even reducing or eliminating them isn't going to solve a $5.3 million budget shortfall. So really, in our opinion, that was going to be cutting off our nose to spite our faces. So here's what we have done. Let me give you a general fund snapshot. Revenue picture. There has been a change to the use tax revenues. As the council will recall, the community voted this past November to make ballot a language change that allows for additional funds from Prop P to flow to the police department. That is great and much needed. It is helping fund that department and that community priority, but that does mean a reduction to the waterfall, to the general fund and the other sales tax funds. That was about $200,000, that reduction in waterfalls to the general fund. There is a voter-approved increase to the state gas tax fund, but that was offset in state statute by decreases in the cable franchise and telephone franchise fees. So the state wanted to try to keep the overall budget picture level, so we didn't gain or lose there, we just stayed flat. As I mentioned, court revenues and fines are down $1.5 million and no $3 million supplement from ARPA this year. Expenditures are actually below last year in the general fund. We are down $3.2 million, so we, as I mentioned, those efficiencies, those elimination of duplications, things like that, we've been able to save $3 million over our expenses from last year. It is going to be supported due to one-time savings, vacancies that we know that we have, things of that nature. So there is some element of using one-time funds to help with the budget this year. The reductions that we're contemplating this year to help balance the budget, fire overtime. Not that we're funding it less, but because of the increase in the fire sales tax that was approved this past November, we're able to charge additional funds over there. We're able to hire more personnel, which lowers the overtime costs. So that saves $1.2 million, but over time, those costs will increase as, salaries and benefits and things of that nature adjust. So we have that benefit right now, but don't bank on that being a permanent, everlasting fix to the budget picture. This budget proposes a savings of $315,000 in Federal Labor Standards Act. What does this mean? This means that we are proposing that this is the year that the council adopts the standards for how overtime is applied for our city workforce that matches federal law. As we've discussed with you before, right now in Independence, an employee can utilize their accrued leave, sick, vacation leave, et cetera, personal business leave, to count towards their 40 hours and then earn overtime in addition to that. Other organizations do this differently. They utilize a requirement that's in the federal law that says you have to work 40 hours, not including your accrued leave, before you can start to earn overtime. This will save $315,000 this year, we estimate, and will increase year over year after that. I'll come back and speak to that a little bit more in just a moment. Vacancy savings. Every year when we build the budget, we know what positions are currently vacant, and there are about 60 or so positions vacant right now in the general fund. We don't anticipate this rush of new employees showing up on July 1. It will take time to post these vacancies, to advertise, to recruit, to hire, to onboard. So we are budgeting those strategically in a way that the timing will allow us to capture $1.9 million in savings. But again, that is kind of a double-edged sword. That's saying our organization is down 60 positions right now, and it is kicking the can down the road one more year, because hopefully we fill these positions, which means that $1.9 million won't be there in savings next year. But again, we didn't want to wipe out city services, so we are doing some of these strategic things to help balance the budget. Health insurance changes. Lest everybody get freaked out, let me tell you what we're talking about here. We have met with our Stay Well Committee co-chair, Mike Veet. We need to work with the Stay Well Committee to make plan design changes that will help us save $1 million and keep the cost of that plan from further accelerating. This is just about managing healthcare expenses. So we've established a good working relationship with that committee chair. We believe that through some of the things they've already done and additional creative suggestions, we're going to be able to make enhancements to the plan that will help us save that. But it is something we need to work on and get in place so that when the new Stay Well year starts on January 1, we'll be able to recognize those kind of savings. So stay tuned. Those are things we're working on, but we are planning ahead and driving that stake in the ground, saying this is something we're going to get to so we can control our health care expenses. Not all of these things will be popular, like for example, the FLSA thing, but I would mention two things to you. Number one, we have to present a balanced budget to you. It's in the charter and it's in the state constitution that grants us a charter. So we had to find a way to do this. Number two, as I mentioned, we really have an obligation to protect basic services for citizens in this community. And as the chamber president, Tom Lesnick, said on Monday night when he stood here, there are a lot of people in our community who are hurting. The recent census data says that 31% of the households in Independence have a median income, household income, of $35,000 or less. And more than that, there's another 31% that have a household income of $15,000 or less. We have to decide, in my opinion, as your city manager, we have to decide as public servants, are we here to serve this community or are we here to be served? We have to recruit and retain a workforce, which means we have to pay competitive wages, but we also have to balance that against our obligation to provide basic services to this community. So these are the recommendations that we have in this year's budget. It is your obligation as council to decide which of these you want to accept. But I will tell you, if we don't do these things, then we have to find a way to generate about $2 million of savings elsewhere. And these are the ways we think we can protect services and our workforce without decimating community services. So let me talk to you about the general fund a little bit more. The top three revenue categories represent 67% of all of our general fund revenue. Those are the payment in lieu of taxes, sales tax, and our cable franchise fees. Sales tax, of course, is susceptible to the volatility of the economy. Franchise fees are looking less and less certain as the state has capped those. But our total general fund revenues are $74.8 million. Last year, as I mentioned, was a little higher because of the $3 million supplement that is not in there this year. Use tax is a very rosy picture. This is great news for the community. We are expecting our budget to increase by about $700,000 this year in the use tax fund. As Wayfair continues to come online, which will allow us to collect additional sales tax revenue, this will only continue to expand and grow. So this is by far not tapped out yet. This is a revenue source that is going to continue to boom and to grow and allow us to serve this community in a meaningful way. Sales tax summary looks a little bit like a roller coaster. It has been volatile. The economic cycle's been rather volatile of late. You can see we estimate that we're going to finish this year with about 6% growth in sales tax revenue, and we're estimating about 4.5% sales tax growth for next year. So that is a very positive picture, pointing to a currently healthy economy. General fund expenditures, you can see that combined salary and benefits are 79% of our budget. That is part of funding a workforce to provide the services in the community. Really, the name of the game is just trying to make sure we control those at a sustainable rate to make sure we're able to continue to fund that and provide those services. This picture is an important one every year. Our total revenue, that is the blue line, and you can see that that is increasing, but not as aggressively as the red line, which is total expenditures, which is increasing at a faster rate, and that gap you see is that structural imbalance in the general fund budget. Expenditures growing at a faster rate than revenues. The yellow line is fund balance. It goes without saying that if you continue to spend more than you bring in, your reserve funds will tank, and that is the fight that we have every year to try to keep our budget balanced and not deplete our reserve fund. Right now, our projected year-end fund balance for the general fund is about $9.2 million. The city policy is 16%. We currently sit at 12%, and that is a good news, bad news situation. The good news is 12% is well beyond where we've been at any point in the last 5 years. The bad news is that is a reflection of the savings from all of the vacant positions, particularly in the police department. So I do not see that as being a sustainable picture. We've benefited from some one-time savings right now. And as I showed on my previous slide, if we project out full staffing, full expenditures, we're not in a place right now where the budget's structurally balanced and allows us to continue to build and get to our 16% goal. Let me talk about a couple other highlights in the general fund before I touch on the utilities. One of the things we've heard loud and clear from our staff, from the council, from the community is continue to add transparency to the budget picture. We've taken a lot of important steps over the last few years to do that. One of the steps we're taking this year to further that goal is setting up what we're calling the Finance and Administration Internal Service Fund. Historically, the practice has been to charge to the different departments costs of doing business. So things like human resources, legal services, technology services, workers' compensation, all those kind of internal, inward-facing things. Because of the charges to the different departments, it's not always been clear to see how that cost allocation model works. So this year, we are setting up a standalone fund where you as the council, our department directors, our community can come in and look and see what are those true costs of doing business. They will all be categorized in one place in this internal service fund and bring about greater financial transparency to some of those inward-facing organizational costs. Enterprise funds, these are your electric, water, and sewer funds. Couple of highlights I'd like to mention there. We are making a strategic drawdown in fund balance in the sewer and water funds to replace aging infrastructure, so water line replacement, some of the sewer laterals, some of the technology at the sewage treatment plant. These are planned expenditures, so you will see those fund balances coming down, but we will still be within the range of the adopted policies while also making some of those strategic investments in the infrastructure, something we're very proud of. We continue to take a very cautious approach with power and light. I'll tell you, we are not on a sustainable path there either. This continues to be a place where expenditures outpace revenues. We will be determining how we can support capital projects, and by how I mean to what degree we can expend funds to invest in the infrastructure there. But we are not on a sustainable path right now with the electric utility. Notable changes, though, across the enterprise funds, adding 4 new employees in sewer to make sanitary collection system repairs, and then additional investment in equipment for that. 2 new employees in the stormwater fund, and additional funding to make repairs to the stormwater infrastructure. 1 new position in power and light to add a meter reading supervisor to oversee the manual process for reading meters that we have in the city, so additional costs there. Multi-year planned drawdown in fund balance in the water fund, as I mentioned, for main replacement. This is something that the deputy city manager and director have been strategically working on, and we're excited to further deploy that model. And then $830,000 in the sewer fund that will be part of the rate increase that is being adopted within the Little Blue Valley Sewer District. The council approved that year-over-year step increase a few years ago, and this is part of that increased rate model within the Little Blue Valley Sewer District and our city portion, City of Independence portion of that rate increase. Other notable changes across city funds, Parks, Rec, and Tourism. We're adding a fiscal administrator there, so for greater fund management. Adding another maintenance worker, which will help us address issues in the parks and the recreational facilities. Adding a multimedia communications coordinator. The council will recall that we have proposed in this budget reducing the overall marketing budget to spend more on maintenance of the historic sites, but we are going to add that multimedia person so that we have an in-house person who can help promote the recreational sites, the tourism sites, the historic sites, as well as all the activities that our Parks Department supports and plans. The fire public safety sales tax, remember again the increase that was voted by the voters in November, so that allows us to add 3 new battalion chiefs, 3 new fire captains, 3 fire equipment operators, 1 new fire inspector, 6 engineers, 6 firefighters, a total of 22 new employees in the fire department. Everybody's favorite slide, the summary. Here's the things you need to know about your budget. Most importantly, it is balanced in accordance with the Constitution and the city charter. We are making strategic service level deployments to match citizen and council expectations for service level demands, the things that we've heard in our survey and in the council strategic plan. We are making strategic use of those one-time resources, as I mentioned, capturing anticipated savings from vacancies to help save $2 million this year. We are proposing some of those structural changes to those legacy costs. Most notably will be the change to the Fair Labor Standard Act for overtime. We are positioning the city, we believe, with this budget to help us attract and retain new development, support things like the North Point project, so making sure we've got the correct investment and capacity to support those kind of projects coming into the city and attracting additional projects of that magnitude, all while avoiding cuts to the budget that would mean further reductions in staffing in employment, and in service. So we are avoiding any of that and being able to sustain our current staffing level, even if we're not able to fully expand it this year. But holding the ground is important, and we're proud that this budget does that. So with that, the budget is now in the hands of the council. Some important timelines. The budget ordinance will be first read on June the 6th, and the second reading of the budget will occur at the June 21st meeting. Make note that that is a Tuesday because June 20th will be the day that the city observes the Juneteenth holiday. The budget public hearing is May 16th, so the next council meeting. We'll get all these dates posted for the community as well. My staff and I look forward to being available to you over the course of the next 45 days or so to answer questions. Of course, we'll answer any that you have today too, but we know this is a lot of information to digest in one setting, so we'll be happy to work with you over the next few weeks as questions arise to help you make this important annual decision. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. The fund balance, 12% will be somewhere south of that at this time next year. Is there a strategy to get back up to 16%?
Well, let me note, first of all, at no point since the council hired me in October of 2016 as manager have we been at 16%. I believe we were somewhere around 4 or 5% at that time. We are up to 12 now, which is great, but still not where we need to be. The council's adopted policy says that we will, if we are not at that number, we will continue to make adjustments every year to get us to 16%. I'll be honest, our strategy right now is simply just to try to balance the budget, but we're going to have to make those tough decisions, things like the Fair Labor Standard Act for overtime, continuing to negotiate sustainable contracts that keep up with the cost of living, but also are able to be supported by the city's revenues, and then of course growing our economy through projects like North Point and the Cargo Largo expansion. All of those will help add additional revenue. But as far as specific strategies or timelines today, we've got our hands full just trying to balance the budget, sir.
Mr. Norris?
Please.
Also, while the fund balance is a great story this year, part of the way we were able to present this balanced budget was a result of the overtime savings in the fire department from adding all those personnel with the sales tax. But that's a short-lived windfall. I mean, we will grow into that very quickly, especially when that new fire station is open, if that fire station is open, I should say, based on the deployment study. But once we grow into that, the overtime comes right back.
And let me pile on to the funeral dirge here. This is the last year that we have federal funds supporting public transit. After this year, we will open up a $1.2 million shortfall if we want to continue funding transit at the level that it's funded right now. So that's another whammy coming down the pipeline in about 12 months.
The full-time employees being added at the fire department, the increase in the sales tax that we passed, that's for employees and personnel and equipment? Or is it?
Yeah, that covers both. And facilities. So
And facilities,
that-
right.
that was-
It's a whatever the fire department needs, they can get. So are we using up all the money on employees, or will there be additional monies for?
So we're still developing that financial long-term plan to make sure that we don't overspend and grow outside of that revenue stream.
I mean, obviously, this is a silly thing to say and obvious, so I apologize. But there isn't going to be any more money for the fire department anytime in the near future. So whatever they get now, like, that's going to be it probably. We all know that. Yes,
Yes.
gotcha. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Mr. Perkins?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Soaking in, digesting, for sure. A lot of these challenges, we knew they were going to be coming down the line, and we also forecast further down the years to know where the hard decisions are going to be made, have to be made. Current year, no furloughs, no layoffs.
No furloughs, no layoffs, and a 2% wage increase proposed for employees, except where we've contractually negotiated something else.
For non-union employees.
Correct.
Kansas City, are they still under furlough?
I don't-
Just out of curiosity.
I can't recall exactly where they're at in their progression right now, but that is something that they certainly utilized and employed during the economic downturn with COVID. That is not something Independence did. We did not have the mass layoffs, furloughs for any employees, anything like that, which is another good story that we like to make sure we share.
Right, for sure. So the conundrum that we're in here as a city, I mean, we can cut and we can reevaluate operational stuff, but until we begin to grow our tax base, that's where we need to be. We can cut all day long and reduce services, city services, and everything else. But unless we grow our tax base, either through new development, greenfield development, or redevelopment, taking advantage of our tourism sites, how do we strategically do those things to bring in the tourism money, keep those tourists here to be able to spend that money through our economy, through hotel stays, and so that would mean hotel development and creation of those new revenues. So as we deliberate a lot of these policies, this is where we kind of rely on staff to try to help brainstorm to get those revenue streams up. It's not an easy task.
It is not. Now, important steps have been taken with the approval of the North Point project, with the approval of the Cargo Largo development. Those have been negotiated in such a way that new revenues will flow to the city, but it will take time. You know, for example, North Point's told us that they're on a 10 to 13 year build out. They're moving dirt at Cargo Largo, but that will take time. So we have to balance against the reality of where we are today and make those strategic decisions. I know, Councilmember, you chair the honor roll working group, and these are the conversations you're having about how do we build assets and invest in sites that make people want to come and stay in Independence, so that we can attract those new dollars and new revenues. And that's why we have these conversations. And as you said, over the last few months, when we've given you some budget updates and presentations, but for the couple of things I've mentioned to you here, making sure we continue to manage our health insurance plan appropriately and we address this overtime issue, this has become a revenue issue for our budget. We are really at a point. I mean, we went through our budget meticulously this year and looked for what are the things we could talk, even if we don't want to, if they're not palatable, what are the things we could do without? And we're just at a point where we would say, we're not doing things anymore. We're not going to do property abatements. We're not going to do dangerous building. And you'd have to, those are $200,000 programs. So you'd have to chunk up a lot of those to get to $5.3 million of savings. And then what kind of city do you have left? So that's where you're exactly right, that it's a revenue issue at this point.
Mr. Walker, you mentioned that IPL was in a downward trend. Do we know what the year end for that looks like?
I'm going to ask Mr. Norris to confirm, but I believe we're forecasting a $2 million shortfall this year.
Bear with me, I'm looking at the report here.
Yes.
Does that include the last February? In other words, so did that cause that loss
No.
contribute to?
To some degree, go ahead.
I would, no, when you're talking about specifically, if you're referring to the winter storm thing, that ultimately that money, those lost revenue or those additional expenditures are recouped as part of the fuel factor over the next, I believe, 18 months, I believe they're recouping. I think probably more problematic was the 6% drop in rates a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I think that's what you're seeing more of the impact.
And I can add a little more color to that too. We are essentially, the management of IPL is working very diligently to try to end the year without a loss every year, and the budget proposed for next year does just that. The challenge with that is, as a utility, our value is in the system, right? And we are essentially balancing the budget on the capital program in that utility, and that is a very dangerous thing to do. We should be investing probably 7 to 10% of our annual revenue into the CIP for IPL, and we are falling short of that.
So it's not just the loss on the P&L statement, so to speak, or the cash, it's really a loss to, we're on top of the cash loss, the balance sheet loss, we're also losing capital value in IPL.
There's
Did I say that right?
That's right, and if I may, sir, I'll make it a little more plain spoken to help, because it's a complicated issue. If you were going to join some sort of organization, some civic club or something like that, there's a certain cost of doing business, right? Like that, and our organization is Power and Light. We don't have enough members in the club to support the cost of doing business. So we are on we don't have enough revenues coming in. We don't have enough people paying into it. We are on an unsustainable path right now of it just costs a certain amount to own and operate an electrical utility, and we don't have what we need to support that.
In reality, we should, if our rates were more accurate or more appropriate, not only would we make up that the general shortfall, the $2 million, but we would also add an additional 10% onto that for capital improvements. But we're years or decades behind on that as well.
I don't know if we would add 10%, but we would need to evaluate exactly what, in addition to the reduction, would need to come back to make sure we're reinvesting properly in that system. And every year that we don't reinvest properly in that system, we fall woefully behind. And that's
Right.
with any infrastructure we have.
Right. Understood. Okay. Go ahead.
As long as we're staying on IPL, so two things with the infrastructure: production and transmission and distribution. So are we that far behind on both of those? I know we've had discussion on what do we do with production, CTs, and the like. And then there's the whole other distribution of that, transmission distribution. So between the two, which one do we look the best on?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part of that.
Between the two, between transmission and distribution and production, which one do we look the best on a capital outlay for sustainability, would you guess?
I think what we do every year, as revenues come in, we look at where our highest priority needs are from reinvesting in our system. What is going to break, right? And what impacts reliability. And we reinvest in those things. But there's a lot of items that fall below that line that we kick down the road. And that's what's happening.
So, Mr. City Manager, so between our total budget of 337, what is the portion of that is IPL?
Can you call it up for me? I want to give you a good number here.
Well, this year's 141.
This year's 141.
141 million.
So that's, that's its own industry. Take all of our general fund, everything else, water and sanitary sewer, that is its own industry that we're competing in such a way to where at the town hall meeting, one of the panels, I think, summed it up pretty well. We're more of a mom and pop and in the world of a big Target and Walmart world, paraphrasing now. This community, we've got to be able to, in the very near future, be able to grasp what is taking place of not having big users, that is the commercial user, the industrial users, the manufacturer users that can really draw down and purchase that power from us as compared to our residents, single-family units or apartment units, which are actually doing the leg work of purchasing the power, which is not decreasing the power, which is not giving us the drawdown on our pricing. That's not going to change in the near future. We would have to have probably another 10 North Points to make that happen, to even bring us back to a good starting point. The conversations in our community is going to have to be as such. What do we do? Do we continue running this? Do we continue monitoring it and try to limp along as best as we can? Or are there other options out there? I mean, these are some hard ones that we're going to have to figure out, I would say, within the next 5 years. Not easy at all.
I agree. The only thing I might reconsider is I think the timeline is even more aggressive than that. We've talked ad nauseum about this new generation issue. The Public Utility Advisory Board has voted against recommending to proceed with that at this time, so we've hit the pause button on that. But hitting the pause button, I mean, there is a cost to doing nothing. I mean, the annual maintenance costs, as Mr. Norris said, the cost deferred of not doing that will only increase. Just in the last month, we found out that, the original bid is increased by $8 million. So I think the timeline is even more aggressive to figure out what does this community want to do with its electric utility and how much are you willing to pay for it?
Absolutely. And if I may continue the conversation, all things politics, depending on what administration is going to be in the White House and what Congress and the Senate decides to choose on their aggressiveness of moving to green energy more fully, makes a big decisions on what we make here now, where we invest. I mean, that is huge to do.
That is very correct.
Mr. Chair, you asked where we're in the best shape in IPL, and Director Nail told me T&D is where we're best situated right now. That's where we're putting most of our funds.
Mr. Fierce, since you came late, you just have to sit and listen for a minute. We're going to get to you, I promise.
No problem. I'm just trying to learn.
So he's going to open his mouth, the pearls are going to come out. I would, generally speaking, I can happy to have input from my fellow board members here, but I'd like to get through this budget. I'd like to see how the year end really wraps up with IPL, and then I think, as a council generally, since we've got past North Point now, that I would think in this committee probably that IPL's got to be a very high priority. Certainly, it's a massive issue and an issue for the future, but also the immediate future. Again, let's get you and your staff through the budget, get the council through the budget, and then I'd really like to take a look at, from this committee's point of view, all the options that would be available, at least the most common ones. The can has been kicked down the road for decades, roughly, from my perspective, and maintenance hasn't been done, even when we had money. I don't know, do we know what the fund balance is, their reserve fund balance is? It's down significantly, I know that.
And below the target amount, but Mr.
Right.
Kidney can give you specifics.
The projection for next year is 49 million, which is within the range of our
Range.
policy.
Pardon me, the target amount though was 52 roughly.
Sure.
I mean, as you recall, there's a range, but then
Yes,
there's
50,
a bullseye.
52.5.
Yeah, it's still down. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, so before that gets down to zero, we need to definitely make some decisions. I would say from my perspective that we should be making a decision on IPL this year or within the fiscal year at the very least. A definitive decision. Please let your staff know, I would say on behalf of our committee, that these are some bigger issues to be looking at going forward, real 30,000-foot view type of stuff. And, let's work together to see what we can.
What do you mean when you say we need to make a decision on IPL regarding what part of? Are you talking about generation, or are you talking about?
All of it. What do we do? Do we buy more stuff? Do we build more stuff? Do we do more generation? Do we not? Do we do contracts? Do we do, God bless it, I wouldn't like to do it. Do we invest in some other power plant somewhere? We need to see what the value of those investments are, the bonds we've guaranteed on Iatan or Nebraska City, our investment in Dogwood. I don't know that we're making money on those. Maybe we are. Maybe the value has increased from our initial investment. My guess is it's not, because they don't even run as much as they did when we first invested. So, I don't know where we're winning in the market. I don't know. So, yes, I'm not trying to push in a certain direction. I'm trying to push in a direction of, if it's not being run not operated, if it's not a business, means it's making more than it's losing, we've got to decide something. We got to figure out a way so that it makes more than it loses, if that's possible. Anyway, that's all. Mr. Fears, please, you probably have a number of questions.
Well, I'm on a steep learning curve here, having not really spent significant time with the budget for about roughly 30 years. So, at least not as much as I used to, let's put it that way. Couple of questions on the FLSA question. Does that only affect general fund employees? Does that affect, are the change that you're proposing on that, is that for all employees for the whole city, or do we have bargaining unit issues, or, I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so let me answer generally, and then I'll have Mr. Norris speak to the specifics of the mechanics of how we address this. To be very direct, no, this impacts all employees, all departments, all funds, with the sort of asterisk exception of the fire department, because their overtime rules under federal law are unique to that operation. So that's a bit of a different animal. But the savings you're seeing here is just projected for the general fund, but this impacts all employees throughout the city who are eligible to accrue overtime. Mr. Norris can tell you specifically how because we've talked about this, we're ready to walk this forward to the council, but he'll speak to the mechanics.
Yeah, so FLSA is addressed in the Personnel Policy and Procedures Manual. FLSA is then addressed in a few work agreements, but not all of them. So where the greatest impact would be, it's not in that work agreement. So as we go forward, the ones that have this in the work agreements, we would need to work with those bargaining units to to see if we can adopt FLSA standards.
Okay, that's helpful. So, you know, and 315,000, that was just in the general fund, correct?
That is correct, and it's an estimate based on, we pulled representative samples of different employee classifications, you know, different categories and departments, looked at their typical overtime earnings, reporting on their timesheets, et cetera, and then extrapolated that out. If we did not calculate it using accrued leave, but only strictly on hours worked, that's a rough estimate of what we believe the 1-year savings for the general fund would be. Go ahead, please. May I, very quickly, Mr. Norris had one other point. Sure.
I also want to point out, so as we've gone through these work agreements, each one of them, and worked with the bargaining units, we've always gone and looked at surrounding cities, what they pay for comparable positions. It's not always apples to apples, but oftentimes it's very close. And we've worked very hard through our contract negotiations to pay comparable wages, kind of at middle of the market, which is what we can afford. So we've worked really hard to drive parity between us and other cities in the area.
Okay, that's helpful.
Councilmember, may I add one more thing, because you touched on an important point. Obviously, we're all still awaiting and eagerly anticipating the external auditor's final report on the police overtime mismanagement issue. It was very evident very clearly, though, and we did not need to have a third-party auditor to tell us this. Part of the causation behind that issue was how we calculate overtime, because that employee was able to use their accrued leave to take vacation time and then come work different odd hours to earn overtime for that work. So addressing this would not solely fix, and we still need to wait for that report to understand the full issues, but this would substantially have helped curtail and guard against that.
Okay, that's helpful. So, you know, I'm, you know, obviously appreciative of the work done in this, and to put together a budget that is a balanced budget. I'm as concerned I am about this budget, I'm also concerned about the next several years, and I just wondered what process we might undertake to evaluate, you know, what we do, you know, so we have a 5-year plan, or, you know, something to that effect, as opposed to just, you know, being, I don't want to get a year down the road and say, well, I wish we'd have done that a year ago, you know, that sort of a thing, so.
Yeah, so I have the pleasure of working with and alongside a really talented team who helped develop the budget, Deputy City Manager Norris and Finance Director Brian Kidney and our Budget Manager Erica Benitez. And one of the things they have been pressing and challenging, rightfully so, to do is try to do more of a multi-year budget development. So you'd still be adopting an annual budget, but we would reflect a picture. Now, one of the things that Mr. Kidney and Mr. Norris have worked on, and we're now able to share with you on an annual basis, is that 5-year financial forecast. But I mean, that is more of a look at, if we continue to do what we do and we budget for known costs, what's going to happen.
Right.
What they are now wanting to do, and appropriately so, is let's kind of start to anticipate, if we make this move, what's that going to do if we, and so we can come to you and report and say, you know, we think this is the year, or maybe in 2 years we need to do this, and have a better forward strategic thinking approach to budget instead of that year-to-year reactionary approach.
Okay, that's great. That's what I was hoping to hear, something to that effect. Okay, so the other question I think that comes to my mind is, and this is just because I don't know, and it may not be a fair question, so tell me if it's not, but when was the last time that, as an organization, you know, we asked our department directors to go through, you know, each and every function that were under their control and evaluate, well, what kinds of things could be done differently to be more effective in what we do, more efficient in our operation. And maybe we do that on an ongoing basis. I don't know the answer. That's why I'm asking the question.
Sure. No, it's a fair question, and I'll answer it two ways if I don't tear up the podium. One is, I believe it was no more than 3 years ago, and it may have only been 2, we did an exercise where we looked at a 3-year average cost for each line item in the budget, so actual expenditures versus budget, and where we saw those large gaps. Say we were budgeting $1 million for overtime, but the department was only spending $500,000. Hint, that doesn't actually happen. We would say, okay, why do we have that $500,000 difference there? And if it was just a product of we've always budgeted it that way, then we captured those savings. So I think we've done that exercise and trued up pretty well. And the reason I'm confident in saying that is I asked our budget manager, Erica, to do that again this year, and she reported back to me, you're really scraping together nickels there. I mean, we are really trued up with our expenditures to actual adopted budget. The few places where we did kind of see some differences, I know Erica was able to discuss that with the department heads, and in every circumstance we had legitimate explanations of, that was a 1-year blip where, we didn't do that program or we came in under budget or whatever, but that was an outlier, not the norm. So the budget you are looking at, and again, I would go back to the slide where the top priority from the citizens was to accurately budget for all known expenditures. I'm very confident that this budget does that.
Okay, one other question, and then I think I'm maybe done for the moment. And that would be, I'm wondering what the process typically, and I should probably know this, but I don't. What is the process that we typically follow from here to get to, approving a budget on June 21? What is to better educate us as council members, and maybe these guys already know it because they've been doing it, but I don't, and so I need a better understanding of the overall budget. Now we can do that. I guess there's a lot of ways to do that. I just didn't know what the typical process is.
Sure, and I say this with all sincerity and very serious about this. This is your process, so we are here to serve. This is a monumental decision, probably in my opinion, single biggest decision you make each year, because it outlines the path forward for the next 12 months. Ultimately, a budget is a plan. It's not an accounting document, but it reflects the council's and community's priorities for that next 12-month period. So to help you make the best informed decision, we are here to help address however you want. Some council members have preferred just to sit down with me and ask general questions. Others have preferred to bring in the department heads alongside with me and ask more specific questions about what's going on in the department or specific issues. Councilmember DeLucy loved to read all 483 pages and have a question for at least every page, if not 10. We are well prepared and well versed to answer those questions, however is best suited to make sure when you vote on the 21st, you're doing so with confidence.
So, Mr. Chairman, what's your proposed process? Or do you have one?
How do you mean?
Well, I'm just wondering, is there a process that this committee would want to follow to, really delve into the budget, or is that something that, I should just take up, I would tend to be more like Ms. Lucy on this particular process, and so that, traditionally that would be my mode of operation. The committee may not want to do that, and so I can do that individually, or, you know, we can do it.
You have absolutely free reign to Mr. Walker and whatever he thinks is fair of his staff. Do not hesitate for any purpose. You have the full support of this committee to
Okay.
investigate. If at some point you want to propose a committee-wide, whether it's this year, next year, or some other time, a more deep committee dive into the budget, I'm certain we would absolutely entertain that. It's been a very individual effort.
Yeah, because it hasn't always been that way. I mean, you know, I recall a time 30-plus years ago where the council met weekly and, you know, presentations were made. I mean, I see Dan out there. Dan would have been part of this. Presentations were made, you know, by each department director as to what, you know, what was encompassed in that particular departmental budget. And so, you know, that was a process to, you know, help educate the council as to, number one, what all was in the budget, but number two, what, you know, what the pieces of the puzzle were. And in terms of changes, proposed changes, or different ways of operating things. So, that, you know, that's what, I mean, I'm just recalling something more, slightly different, which doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. It's just, you know, I just am thinking about something different. So, so I just didn't know if there was, if that's, you know, and maybe it's too early, maybe it's too, in fact, I'm not sure we didn't start this process a little earlier than right now. You know, maybe we entertain something like that in a future year, and maybe we do what we're doing now this year, and I'll just deal with Zach on my individual questions at this point. Like I say, I know I'm on a steep learning curve here, and so I'm just trying to, but this to me is one of the most important things we do as a council, and so I just want to try to understand and as much as I can in a short period of time. So.
Yeah, completely understand, and we, having individual directors is something we can certainly discuss probably for next year if we.
And that wasn't done at the Audit and Finance Committee. That was done for the whole council.
Oh, yeah.
What I'm recalling, you know.
I know Dan Montgomery would love that. I know he'd probably like to come in 4 or 5 times.
I'm not asking for. Anything.
So would Lisa, is probably a budget nerd.
I'm just looking at, Dan's the only one that was here back 30 years ago when I was here, so, you know. Someone not even born at that point, right? So, it just shows how old I am, right?
Mr. Chair.
Please.
Mr. Fierce, I do recall some of those, and we did have those budget meetings. We had Mondays and Tuesday nights for almost a month. We had them just back to back, and some of them were okay. A lot of it was truly repetitively redundant on what basic services each department was given. So I was there for that, and I don't know if I gained as much out of them, but we can definitely have some dialogue to refine, maybe depending on given the gravity of these issues that are coming up, we can kick around maybe having a half a day full council to discuss the budget. I'm anticipating that we're going to have this at a study session too as well.
What we planned to do was just put on the study session discussion of budget and allow an additional forum for the full council to make inquiries. I wasn't planning to give the presentation again, but I certainly can. It'll be made available. This meeting's being recorded and will be made available online. And we just simply thought we'd put a placeholder on an upcoming agenda to allow the council to discuss, but of course we'll take direction, again, whatever helps you make the most informed choice.
I think that might be most valuable There'll be a public hearing on this.
Yes, next Monday night, not but the 16th.
Yeah, the 16th.
Right.
After that, probably would be appropriate to do the budget as a study session, just for a Q&A.
Right, right. We can introduce the topic and then allow the council to have dialogue as they need to.
And perhaps we can notify the council ahead of time that, you know, if they have specific questions for certain directors or for certain departments or something unique, that
Right.
perhaps, if it works, you know, we could have those department heads available, you know, if there's minutia.
Absolutely. And again, I will encourage you, as the charter says, the council is able to make inquiry of staff. Reach out to the directors as you need to. They will let me know when you've done that, and if I think the issue is one that would be of interest to the full council, we'll report the answer. But reach out, make your inquiries, make your questions. That's what this process is designed to do.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
I would even go one more step further, that now, since we have a management analyst now, that if any of our colleagues have a more specific dive in a department or area, that they can submit their request to the Audit Finance Committee, which in turn gives that workload over to our management analyst. So we have those mechanisms in place now, and they do work well.
That's a spectacular point, actually, and as we've sort of tasked him to familiarize himself with the budgeting process and the budget itself, he'd be very well placed to do some work for us in that regard. Anything else on the budget, gentlemen?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
Can we keep going? We here until 5? Absolutely. Okay.
Knock yourself out.
Mr. City Manager, you're talking about our transportation and the shortfalls that are going to be coming with that. To try to head that off, should we have discussion with KCATA to see if there's any possible funding that could come through the federal level, through there working with Robbie to try to help soften that blow and those decision makings?
I will tell you, yes, our community development director, Tom Scannell, does this on a regular and routine basis, has a very good open line of communication with staff at the Area Transportation Authority. They know our challenges, and this was highlighted in the budget process a few years ago. As a quick reminder, just for the community, because I know you all are well versed in this, the transit users who use that system, that is their primary mode of transportation. It is not a luxury, it is a necessity for them getting around in the community. The problem, almost akin to the power and light issue we talked about, is there's a certain cost to operating a transit system, and we do not have enough users to support the minimum operating costs of that. ATA has been a good partner with us to try to deal with issues like route design, to try to obtain federal funding. So we'll continue to have those conversations. It is really, though, a structural broken system that we need to figure out how we can continue to move to more of an on-demand model where those users who need that can get transit to get to those point-to-point destinations they're looking for. And I can't say enough good things about ATA. They've been a good partner to facilitate that. We just have to get our arms around those structural issues to try to fix that.
Fair enough. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fears, anything else on the budget? Anything else from you or your staff, Mr. Walker, on the budget?
I thank you for your time today. We look forward to working with you to move towards budget adoption later next month.
Sure appreciate your hard work and all your staff's hard work. Thank you very, very much.
They do deserve a tremendous amount of credit. I know that sometimes the thought is there that we've got egregious proposals or unwarranted spending. The team only brings forward the most essential requests, and very proud of them for their fiduciary thoughtfulness with that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we get to the next item and schedule our next meeting, I wanted to throw an idea past my fellow committee members. There are 3 things that are important to me that I would also like to tack on to Mr. Green's, sort of put it on his radar. The performance audit of the Staywell Committee, and I'm assuming, Mr. Norris, that city staff is working with the Stay Well Committee to do that, schedule it, get it bid, however you're gonna do it. Is there any update you can give me on that at all?
Sure. Yeah, I met with our CBIZ consultants that actually have a department separate from the ones we work with that do performance audits. Met with them Wednesday. They're to have a proposal to me next week. I then have a meeting scheduled then with the leadership of Staywell, and we'll just kind of see what that scope is and move forward with that. Whether or not we need to bring it back to council for consideration based on the cost of that, or whether or not we can move forward with that. But yeah, that it is moving forward.
And I don't want to step on toes, and I hadn't talked about this to you beforehand, but would it be a problem if Mr. Green is just at that meeting, or?
I've met with Mr. Green several times, and it would be our pleasure to host. I mean, we're looking forward to working with them.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Yeah, absolutely.
good work, gentlemen, and thank you. Seriously, no, I appreciate that. There's not, okay, second one, these are all surprises, but hopefully they're not too big a deal. The payroll software, there's not much to do on that, other than we're waiting to,
We have an update on that.
oh, you do?
Yeah, so Cindy, our CFO, and Ron Luce, the consultant that's
Yeah.
working with it, everyone seems to love. They have been working, well, I love Ron too. What's not to love?
That's right.
But they've been working very diligently. They have gone and done these surveys with the different departments, getting the input on their needs. So that part of it is going into the scheduling portion is moving forward. That train is not stopping.
Yeah, I
we're
figured.
moving forward. So,
Yeah.
but I don't think I'd have anything really of substance to report right now of where we
Yeah.
are, except to say that it is moving. I'll just anything.
Met with all the departments, and so now we're gathering all that information to start bringing together, information, and then we'll do another round of timekeepers.
Wonderful. Thank you for the update. Probably not much for you to do on that yet then. Thank you. And then the last part is, and this is really for Mr. Norris more, would it make sense for Mr. Green to at least meet Dan Nelson, or should we, I mean, he's not providing reports to anybody at this point. He's just doing the work.
I think we ought to just let Dan Nelson do his thing.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Okay, well, that's all I have. He's doing the police investigation, the overtime investigation. Unless there's anything else from you, gentlemen. Let's pick the date for the next meeting. Well, no, it would be wait,
So,
Yes,
if you might,
please,
would mind.
please.
Our last discussions, whether or not these meetings are going to continue on a monthly basis or move to a quarterly basis, which was, that when we discussed, that's why we put those two dates
Yep.
on the meeting. Typically, this meeting takes place the fourth Friday. We post our financials on the 15th of each month, and so
Yep.
that gives us enough time to make sure that we're hitting those. And it also ties in our investment reports, the quarterly investment reports would also hit at the quarterly meetings. We're fine. We would love to continue. I love showing off our financials.
Yep.
So we have no problem moving monthly, but I do know the discussion was whether or not you wanted to move quarterly. If it was monthly, the next natural one would be the end of this month, which is May 27th. We moved this one to the 6th because of the public hearing and coming up on
Yes.
the budget. So that's
Well, I don't want to have two meetings in a month. The question would be whether and this is a question for us too, whether we continue monthly for now, for any amount of time. We had initially talked about, before you got here, Jared, we were getting ready to go back to quarterly. We had some deficiencies in our single, what's that called?
It was our single audit.
Just our single audit. And those have been remedied, so we were doing monthly. We also were a bit behind on the big software Munis implementation, which we're now also totally up to speed on. So your input's fine. I'm sure you'd like to have more meetings than not, just to feel like you're getting caught up, but
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I'd prefer to continue meeting monthly, I think, but I mean, once I get a better handle on things, I may feel differently.
if we were gonna do that, would we prefer to have another meeting before we vote on the budget? The vote on the budget will be on June 21st. If we were gonna do that, we'd need to have a meeting on one of the days before that. Typically, do you need to keep that time before the budget process open, that vote, for any reason?
No, not at all. We'd be, yeah, we'd be good on, we just wouldn't have the May financial reports for you
Yep.
at that time, but we'll have the April reports.
Well, how
At that
about if we
time.
did June 17? What does that look like?
If Friday's what you like, then by golly, they're my favorite days of the week to have meetings. But we're totally open.
That's
in
what
that way.
Adam Norris told me. That's his favorite day too, he said. For now, let's do June 17th. Is that okay with you guys? Is that okay? That way, if there's any last minute budget questions we want to bring up for the final vote, we can. It gives us plenty of time to read it 2 or 3 times in between, and we'll go
Give
from
our
there.
Colleagues time to, any deep dive questions or anything specific.
That's right.
Keep that going.
Absolutely. Okay, so June 17th, 2:30 right here. And with that, it is 3:58, meeting's adjourned.